Welcome to the Tuva project. Today we're going to talk about classifying ED visits. And the basic question we're trying to answer is, how are people using the emergency department? This work can be traced back to a publication coming out of NYU in the year 2000, where this group of researchers profiled ED use in New York City and developed a classification system for categorizing ED visits. And they did this by reviewing approximately 6 million records of patients who used the city's EDs in the years 1994 and 1998. And they bucketed ED visits into 4 categories. So the first category was non-emergent. These are patients who went to the ED and care was not actually required within 12 hours. The second category is emergent but primary care treatable. These are situations where care was actually required within 12 hours, but that care could have been provided in a primary care setting instead. The third category is emergent ED care required but preventable. These are situations where emergency care was required, but the visit could have been prevented if timely and effective primary care had been provided. And the fourth category is emergent ED care required, non-preventable. These are situations where emergency care was required and primary care treatment could not have prevented the visit. So this is what the distribution of ED visits looks like in the year 1998 across these 4 different categories for New York City. And it's shocking that over 80% of ED utilization is inappropriate because we only have 17.9% of all ED visits falling into this category where ED care was actually necessary and it was not preventable. So this was, like I said, published in the year 2000. Then in the year 2017, this was published. It was a patch to this original algorithm because the percent of unclassifiable visits had increased since the year 2000 because new ICD diagnosis codes were being used, and the algorithm was updated to include the new diagnosis codes that were being used now, and also to use ICD-10 codes, which were released in 2015. And then in the year 2020, a different revision was published. This revision included more recently introduced ICD-10 codes and included new classification categories. So how does the ED classification algorithm work? Well, we have 9 categories in the most recent version of the algorithm. We have the non-emergent category, we have the emergent but primary care treatable category, we have the emergent ED care needed but preventable category, the emergent ED care needed but not preventable category, and then we have 5 more categories for injury, for mental health related visits, for alcohol related visits, for drug related visits, and then we have a 9th category for all the visits that cannot be classified into any of the previous 8 categories. So we classify each ED visit into one of these 9 categories solely based on its primary diagnosis code. So we have a table that gives the probability of each ICD code belonging to each of the 8 different categories. So here are all the different ICD-10 codes, and there's a category for ED care needed but not preventable. There's a category for ED care needed but preventable. There's a category for emergent but primary care treatable, and for non-emergent, and so forth for all the other categories. So the instructions are very simple. The instructions are, we look at the primary diagnosis code of each ED visit, and then we look up that code in this table and identify the category with the highest probability of being associated with that code. And then we assign that category to the ED visit. If all the probabilities are 0 for any primary diagnosis code, or the code is not present on this lookup table, we assign that ED visit to the category not classified. And that's it. If we follow these instructions, we can classify each ED visit into one of the possible 9 categories. So now I'm going to walk you through how to do this in a Jupyter notebook. If we go to the Tuva Notebooks repo in the Tuva project GitHub page, here we have the Tuva Notebooks. There is a link there to this ED classification notebook. So I'm going to click on this and open this notebook. Anybody can open this and run in their browser. And what this is just showing what this notebook is doing. It's going to take ED encounters and classify them into one of these 9 categories. You can read through this and play around with this notebook. So I'm just going to run this. We start by installing DuckDB and importing all the necessary things to run this notebook. We're going to load in a CSV file. This notebook automatically loads in a CSV file that has over 400 ED visits. And for each of these visits, it gives us a unique identifier for the visit and the primary diagnosis code in the visit. That's all we need to be able to classify the ED visits. We just need an identifier for the visit and a primary diagnosis code. So here we're setting up DuckDB. We're loading here the files for the ED encounters and the lookup tables that give us the probability of each diagnosis code belonging to each of the categories. So let's see what the ED encounters table looks like. It just has 3 columns: encounter ID, primary diagnosis code, and then it tells us if the primary diagnosis code is ICD-9 or ICD-10. Here, let's look at what this table looks like. It tells us for each ICD-10 code, we have the probability of that code being associated with each of the 8 categories. Similarly, for ICD-9 codes, we have this table that for each ICD-9 code, we get the probability of that code being associated with each category. Here we're going to see the number of rows in each of these tables. There's 402 rows in the ED encounters table, so that's 402 ED encounters. And this is the code that assigns the categories to the visits. So here we're just joining the ED encounters to these lookup tables. And so for each ED encounter, we're going to assign the probability of the encounter belonging to each of the different categories. Then we're going to take, for each ED encounter, the category that has the greatest probability. And that's the category that we assign to each encounter. That's what we do here. And then finally, we're just going to label each category with more human readable terms, because these are just codes representing the categories. And here we're labeling them with more human readable sentences. If we run this whole thing, we end up assigning a category to each ED visit. And we're populating that into a table in our DuckDB database. So now we can just look at what this table looks like. We have an encounter ID, and for each encounter ID, we have the ED classification that encounter gets. And here's just an example of counting how many encounters we have in each type. We have the biggest number of encounters is non-emergent, and the second biggest is emergent, but ED care is needed, but it's not preventable. This is just running on a synthetic data set, so that these distributions are not realistic. But I encourage you to go play with this notebook and understand how the algorithm works.